if we are to grow into being the fulfillment of the church that Jesus intended as he gave us the blueprints of the church. What must be done is we must look back at that first church and say, what were their practices? What was it that they did? What distinguished that early church? And how can we continue in those practices today? In this lesson, we will look at 5 specific practices that the early church did, that was a part of the culture of the early church, so to speak. And we will discuss how they are still applicable in the 21st century church today, and how they're applicable for each and every one of us. Our 3 objectives this week is first to study these 5 practices of the first church. Secondly is to discuss ways that we can implement these practices in our own life. Finally, our 3rd objective is to discover the positive differences, their devotion to these 5 principles, these 5 practices, and what it made and how we should expect them in our own life. Our first talk point says that you maybe go to an office building or you visit a friend and possibly you see a unique plant in the corner, or let's say you're at a doctor's office and you see a really nice fish aquarium, or you're at a friend's house and they maybe have a new dog or they have a new pet, and you become interested in this. And maybe if you're like me, you do weeks of research, finding out every single possible thing that you can know about this. And then you begin the next steps, and maybe you purchase the plant, or you purchase a fish aquarium, or you purchase the dog, or whatever the animal or the object is. And our question for this, and where we're setting the group discussion up, says, now what? Is it enough to possess the plant or the animal or the object? How do we keep it alive and growing? Our practical application that walks us towards kind of answering some of this group discussion says, as with anything living, it is necessary to find out how to keep it alive and to nurture its growth. My wife and I got a puppy several weeks ago, or months ago now, I guess. And whenever we were looking at the dog and we were talking to the breeder from, a little over 1,000 miles away, the puppy's cute, and we decide that we want to get it. Well, soon after getting it, when the puppy's waking you up at 6 o'clock in the morning, the cuteness can wear away pretty quickly. And what we're really talking about here in this point is that growth takes work. That growth is not a passive or a casual experience that we just kind of just roll with. But if we're going to truly take care of something, whether it's a plant or if it's an animal or if it's something else, it takes work. And the point that we're kind of setting up as a metaphor, so to speak, is this is how the early church was. The growth of the early church, the growth of the church today, it takes work. There are specific principles and there are specific practices that require, as we continue to walk through and growing into the church that God intended for us to be. One of the key facets that is integral to the growth of the church is unity. As we look through Acts, whether from Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2, even through the latter portion in chapter 28, Acts is a book, and it denotes the unity of the early church. As we've discussed even so far, that they were all in one mind and in one accord when the Spirit fell. When we look in our last lesson, in lesson chapter 3, as we talked about, Peter has preached and he said, all of you, you're guilty of killing the Messiah. You've killed him. He came. He said there's this comforter to come. We've received the promise that he said was going to come. And Peter preaches to him. And what do they respond? They say, what must we do? It was not one isolated person sitting in the corner who cries out and is like, listen, I can't take it anymore. What do I have to do? This message is so heavy. No, they cried out and said, what do we have to do? There was this unity on the day of Pentecost. Unity is that glue that is there that holds the church together, that keeps us unified ultimately in what God has for each of us corporately. We're going to walk through these 5 specific practices that the early church, the disciples and the followers of Jesus, that they devoted themselves to. First and foremost, they devoted themselves to the apostles' doctrine. As we talked about in previous lessons, our spiritual foundation, this foundation that we have, is one of the most important parts of getting our relationship with God right. As if you're building a house or if you're building a skyscraper, or we understand that the foundation is the most important part. If you want to build 59 stories up, but your foundation's wrong, it's going to be dangerous, and the building could possibly collapse, or there could be serious problems that could put people's lives in danger. The Bible talks about us as being the temple of the Lord, that we're this body fitly framed together, as Paul uses all kinds of metaphors and illustrations. And the same is true in our life, that if we can get the spiritual foundation right, and that's why we've spent extra time on Acts chapter 2, that if we can get this foundation right, if we can get the apostles' doctrine right, then we're in a good place to build up into our relationship with Jesus Christ. Our point here talks about how many Christians neglect to make doctrine or religious tenets a priority because of the fact that they can lead to confrontation and disagreement, and because of that, many kind of look past it and they just preach the love and the grace and the faith and the mercy and all these very true aspects of who Jesus is, but neglect the portions of doctrine that can cause some confrontation. Certainly, we do not want to cause confrontation in our Bible studies. As we talked about in our previous lesson, we're wanting to affirm each and every member of our groups and their relationship with Jesus Christ and the steps that they've made in their own spiritual journey. But we're also not wanting to apologize for what the apostles' doctrine is. We're wanting to be diligent with it. We're wanting to be skillful in our approach. But we're also wanting to say, this is what the apostles' doctrine is. This is what Peter preached. This is what the book of Acts is founded upon. This is what our lives and our faith in our church is founded upon in the apostles' doctrine. The second point that the disciples devoted themselves to was fellowship. Our group question here says, why do you think fellowship is important? As we look in the Bible from the beginning of Genesis, when God makes heaven and earth, and we walk into day 6 when God forms man of the dust of the earth and he breathes the breath of life into him. When Adam takes his first breath and comes alive, it is him and God. Each and every one of us were formed to have a personal relationship with God. That social component, that desire for relationship is innate in who we are, because it is who we were created to be and what we were created to do. We are creatures that were designed for relationships and designed for fellowship. And so fellowship is important because it's integral to our own human experience and our own human condition. But also, as we kind of reinforce some of this, it's also important as we just get to know and grow in the faith. That we can, when we can interact with people who have the same faith, or with those who are growing in the faith, that they can fellowship, they can see the facets of the church. They can see the dynamics of what the church looks like in practice. As we move on to point number 3, it says the breaking of bread. And our group question here says, why might eating together be listed as a key? I was just reading a book yesterday, actually, and the author, he made this point, and he said that Jesus literally ate his way through the Gospels. When we look at the life and the ministry of Jesus, from his first miracle, he's at a wedding feast, and he's turning water into wine. He's cursing a fig tree because there's no figs on it. He's at the Last Supper with the disciples, and he's saying, "Take, this bread is my flesh. This cup is my blood that's poured out for you." As we walk through the life and the ministry of Jesus, he is eating and he's breaking bread. He's multiplying food to the 5,000. That this human experience of this life that we have is a core component of eating and drinking and sustaining ourselves. And Jesus himself was an example that just the aspects of eating and drinking and nourishing our bodies can be used as an example to portray the church. It can be at times of fellowship and sharing meals together. It can be of servitude, of making meals and serving others. That breaking bread, I mean, Jesus himself said in the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread," speaking of both the natural needs that we have and the spiritual needs that we have. The fourth point here is prayer. We understand that praying in private is very important in our personal lives of devotion and our relationship with God. But we also understand, especially as it comes to the book of Acts, and our group question here says, what is the benefit of praying with others? As we walk through the book of Acts, we'll see the numerous times where the church came together and prayed and the miracles that were done as the result. The Bible even talks about how one puts 1,000 to flight, but two, 10,000. That unity that we've talked about in this lesson so far, and coming together and praying together, we can uplift each other's needs. We can be that strength and that support. But it can also be a place of spiritual warfare. It can be a place where we can come together and be the church as a combined whole. Point number 5 says church attendance. As we have a portion of Acts 2:46 here, it says, "Day by day continuing in the temple." Our group question here says, what might be the benefit of faithful church attendance and involvement with like-minded believers for you and for others? Again, we've talked about unity, of assembling together. The disciples, that 120, they were assembled together and the Spirit fell. Praying together, as we've talked about, of upholding each other in faith and in strength and in unity of this corporate body of believers. For me, I believe one of the important aspects of this is that aspect of community, that coming together in consistent faithfulness. It creates this community of fellow believers that we can lean on when we are in need, and that we can be the strength to others who have a need. What it really creates is this subculture, this culture that is that we're not separating ourselves in isolation from the world, but that we are creating a subculture within the world, that this is who we are, that here's the culture that we have of the church. We understand that the church itself, as we've talked about so far in these Bible studies, that we are to reach the world, that as we talked about in Luke chapter 24, that this is a gospel, this is a message that's for all people. Peter himself preached and 3,000 were saved on the day of Pentecost. It's a message to the whole world. And so we have to go out, we have to reach them. But at the same time, we have to assemble together. As we come in faithfulness, as we come as this body of believers, it gives us the strength to continue to do the work of the Lord. What were the result of these 5 practices? First, miracles. We see numerous times throughout the book of Acts of miracles and healings and spiritual breakthroughs taking place. There was also the spirit of generosity that flowed through the book of Acts. We see this spirit of gladness and sincerity of heart that was a portion of what the early church was and how they conducted themselves. We also see that they had favor with people because of the love that they had for one another, the generosity that they had. We also see that Jesus added to his church. As a portion of these 5 keys, we see how each of these practices ultimately brought these results. So our key takeaways for this lesson are these 5 specific principles. these things that are vital for church growth in the earth across the world. First, the apostles' doctrine. Second, in fellowship. It's in breaking of bread, it's in prayer, and it is in committed church attendance, of attending the house of God. Our assignment for lesson 4 is to rehearse how the first church did things in Acts chapter 2 and to work toward carving out ways to implement their practices in our day-to-day lives. Our second assignment is to read Acts chapter 3, study the miracle of the crippled man at the gate called Beautiful. In our conclusion, we talk about how praying that we will emulate the first church in our own lives, in our communities, and in our own churches so that we can be like that first church, that we can live out the promises and the blueprint that Jesus gave to the first church that he still intends for us to be today in the 21st century church. I pray that God will bless your Bible studies this week as we continue to walk in being the church that God intended us to be. God bless you.